All right, welcome everybody. Ignite 2017. You guys having fun? Good. You're going to have fun tonight, BC Place, right? Fantastic. All right, before we get going, this is a pretty important session because I've met a lot of customers and they're asking me, what should I do about decryption? And how do you roll it out? So, show of hands. How many people here are actually doing decryption today? Excellent, excellent. And the other half? Actually, it's about 1/3. I count about 1/3. All right, so this session is called Stop Operating in Darkness. My name is Philip Kwan. I'm out of headquarters in Santa Clara. I'm one of the PanOS product line managers, and with me, I have a co-presenter, Paul Lingeman. He's one of our pro services engineers and experts. You guys all know Paul, right? Paul used to be a customer before he was a pro services guy out of Canada, actually, Toronto Dominion. Hi, Paul. All right. So let's get going. We've got a lot of good information from you, and I'm going to err on the side of giving you more information simply because this is a pretty hot topic, very, very important for you guys to get right and to fully understand what it takes to roll this guy out. That's my objective today. So, stop operating in darkness. What do I mean by the title of this session? Well, as security professionals, I'm sure you've had a VP, a department manager, or somebody come up to you and go, hey guys, I think there's somebody in the company that is emailing or sending some confidential information out of this company. So if I come to you guys and I said, hey, Phil, I need to track somebody, I think they're doing something bad, and I think they shipped a file out. And if I said, well, that file was 344 kilobytes in size, is that going to help you as an IT professional? Not a lot. So what if I give you guys some layer 3, layer 4 information, I give you something out of a port-based firewall. Now you have some IP, now you have some destination ports. Does that help you guys nail the culprit to the wall with HR? Probably not. Okay, let's take it up a layer. What if I give you app ID and user ID? Now you know some guy in product management named B. Smith. They sent something out to a geo-region in Canada. Is that going to help you? It might. But then when you confront Mr. B. Smith, he might go, well, that's my mom's favorite apple pie recipe, and I was just sending it to my cousin in Canada. Now what are you going to do? You can't do much against that. If he's using the SSL protocol and you are not decrypting, this is where you stop. This is it. This is all the forensics and the visibility you have. However, for those that raise their hand, if you are doing decryption, you can now see that Mr. B. Smith went under the HTTP protocol. They used something called slide share. And on top of slide share, using our app ID capabilities, he was using the upload function, and he did send a PDF out, and that PDF was called roadmap.pdf. So now, as a security professional, you have all the ammunition and the visibility you need, and the guy is busted, correct? And so, hence, don't operate in darkness. Let the SSL decryption light the way, and this is the rest of our presentation. So, this slide is just about statistics. And so why should you care about SSL? The statistics on the left-hand side simply say that, hey, a lot of people are starting to get into encrypted traffic. You can see by the number of certificates, by the browsers we use, by the social networking sites we use, it's becoming a lot more predominant. On the right-hand side are statistics that basically say, hey, not only is it becoming more popular, but the encryption strength, PFS, or perfect forward security, is starting to gain hold. It's starting to become much more popular. And if you're not doing any decryption now, within a year and a half, 75 to 80% of all internet traffic will be encrypted. So this is something to seriously take into consideration. So, a little bit of network jeopardy. Raising of hands. How many people think, this question up here, what percentage of malware is delivered across an SSL encrypted tunnel? How many people think it's about 10%? Show of hands. Nobody, all right. 1/3, 33%. Okay, a couple hands. How many people think it's about half? More than half. All right, so people think that's a lot. The correct answer is about 1/3 according to 2016 statistics that we have. And so the first 3 slides alone, for those that are not doing decryption, this should be one of those moments, right? You should be really asking yourselves, are you really protected from your users going out to the internet? All right, so I want to make sure, because so many people here have not deployed decryption yet, let's get a couple slides out of the way, housekeeping, make sure that we're all on the same page. So in terms of Palo Alto Networks technology, we do 4 different types of decryption technology. The first one by far is the most popular. This is the one that most people implement. This is outbound decryption, also known as forward proxy, also known as man-in-the-middle. And we're going to talk a little bit about man-in-the-middle. The other one, of course, is inbound. This is where people on the internet is coming into your data centers, your DMZ, they're accessing a service, and you really want to decrypt that service just in case they're uploading files to your servers, and you want to make sure those are clean, right? The next one is SSH. And what we do in SSH is we make sure that SSH isn't being used as a tunneling mechanism to where I could steal or move files in and out of your company. The last one is called decryption mirror port. The decryption mirror port's fairly straightforward. You set up a policy, you said stuff matching this policy I want to decrypt, and then I want to shove all that clear text out of a specific interface. And then some third-party device like a recorder, DLP device, they will basically analyze that clear text and they'll take it to the next level. So something on HSMs. How many people here use HSMs? Yeah, a few. HSMs are for those companies or those verticals that really care about how secure their private keys are and things like that. So an HSM is a hardware module certified by FIPS-CC to basically protect your private keys. And we support 2 different vendors. One is Gemalto SafeNet, and the other is Talus. Okay, so just know that we do support these. Okay, let's talk about that first flavor of decryption that I talked about. That's the most popular one. That's the one that most people use. And I said we were man-in-the-middle. What exactly do we mean by man-in-the-middle? On this diagram, you see the firewall, the little blue guy in the middle, and we sit in between the client and the server. And when a client starts a TLS session to the outside server, like google.com, yahoo.com, Twitter, whatever's encrypted, the firewall intercepts that handshake. We act as the server on behalf of the public server. Then what we do is we start a whole new session to the original server, and to the internet, we look like we're the client, hence the term man-in-the-middle. There's 2 separate sessions or TLS handshakes going on. The server is really none the wiser. He's going to send back the certificate. We analyze that certificate. If the certificate is okay according to the policies and the profiles that you guys set in the firewall, then we actually use something called an impersonation certificate. And that impersonation certificate, which is the pink, orangey looking color certificate up there, we simply transfer a lot of the extensions from the original server certificate and we pass it on to the client. Client, of course, will do their due diligence and they will check that certificate. If everything's okay and they like it, then we start the whole process of the key exchange. And so the key exchange is again proxied by the firewall, and then once the key exchange is complete, we have our seed material, key material, and now we could do our bulk encryption, decryption through the firewall. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Now, since I talked about those important things called certificates, let's demystify 2 of them. We have something called a trust certificate and something called an untrust certificate. The trust certificate, when you declare it, you see that little checkbox up there with the little green arrow. That's how you denote the certificate that we're going to use to impersonate back to the client when the site is good and trusted. Similarly, we have an untrust certificate. And the untrust certificate, of course, pretty obvious, is when we don't trust the site, we don't like it, everything's not good with it, we use this particular certificate, and what we want to do is trigger something on the browser that displays a warning message so that the user knows to stop what they're doing. So when you basically load these certificates up on the firewall, the forward trust certificate, that's the one with the green arrow, typically has to go into your end device's browsers underneath that trusted root CA store. Any CA that's listed under that is trusted, and basically they don't see any warning messages. The untrust certificate we don't want to install in the store, and we purposely want to trigger something on the browser that says, hey, this is an untrusted site, you shouldn't go here. And our jobs as security professionals is to really train our end users to watch for this. If they see this, they shouldn't be proceeding. Okay, now this next little bullet here on the bottom, I get asked, does Palo Alto Networks downshift security? What I mean by downshifting security is, do you actually have a different cipher suite going to the internet and a different, weaker cipher suite going back to the client? And the answer is no. Some products will do this. Some SSL offloaders or some other firewall may be doing it, but Palo Alto Network Security, we believe that the right way to do it is to basically honor the ciphers and the key algorithms that were properly negotiated between the client and the server. We do no downshifting for performance reasons, and hence we believe that's a stronger security stance. So our best practice to you here is make sure that only the trust is in that CA. So in terms of like implementation, Paul, what have you seen?
So with a lot of customers, I see a lot of customers trying to deploy these two certificates as just cut one sub-CA and deploy that one sub-CA across their enterprise for all the perimeter firewalls. That's not really a recommended approach. We would prefer you to cut a sub-CA for each perimeter firewall. It just makes it easier. Think about if you needed to revoke that certificate at any one time. Now you've got, let's say, 20 perimeter firewalls where you have to take a certificate, cut another one, and put a certificate in there, as opposed to having specific certificates for each perimeter site around the globe.
Right. So just remember, you have two certificates. Okay, so we also get asked, if we copy our certificates and private keys onto your firewall, how do you guys safeguard these certificates and private keys? So the first one is that we do encrypt them with our master key. So rest assured that they are secure on our firewalls. If you're using our HA technology, active passive or active active, whenever you copy one of the certs and the keys on one of the members, we of course, we map it out and we duplicate the keys onto the firewall cluster members. That is also secured in an encrypted tunnel. Now remember that man in the middle? That's when the firewall actually mimics the real server and we do the key exchange with the end client. Whenever we do a key exchange, those are dynamically generated by the firewall, they're stored on the firewall, and then every day at 12 midnight, local firewall time, we actually rotate and refresh the keys. So that way you guys are assured that new key material is generated every 24 hours. So before we actually get to the component about how do you set this up, the order that you set this up, and the gotchas, we need to talk a little bit about logistics and legal considerations. The reason why we have to talk about this is this feature freaks out all end users. The minute they find out that you're actually decrypting and looking at secure content that they thought was secure, they kind of put the brakes on anything, right? And they kind of challenge you because they don't like that idea. So, you know, Paul's had a lot of experience rolling out this stuff as a pro services engineer. He's seen the good and the bad. And so what we find works really well is you got to make sure you have the proper executive backing and the proper legal backing. You have to understand the regions you're rolling this out because every region may have different security policies, have privacy policies and so forth. You need to understand those. What is really, really important is that all your executive teams, your HR teams, fully understand the benefits of doing this because 33% to 40% of all malware goes across an encrypted tunnel. And if you're not doing this, you're exposing your company to a much higher risk. So, computer usage policies, we all have those in our corporations. When you decide to do decryption, you should always be working with HR to double check that those computer usage policies are up to date. If they're not up to date, you don't have the teeth to back up your policies. So that's very, very important. Now, we also believe because this contains privacy, and privacy tends to freak end users out, you have to really do a good job at educating your users, educating your department managers of what the advantages are to the risks and making sure that they fully understand and back this up. Otherwise, once you start running into resistance when you roll this out, believe it or not, it's not the technology that makes this thing difficult to roll out. More than half of it, I would say, is political. And Paul can probably talk to that better than I can. So.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize these last 2 points. Educate the users, train the desktop and support centers. I've seen more SSL decryption deployments backed out because the due diligence wasn't done up front. So remember, the user experience might change on the cutover day. So if your NOC isn't trained on how to deal with those calls, what's going to happen is they're going to get inundated with a bunch of NOC calls. Your NOC is going to, the manager of NOC is going to call and say, you got to back this out. We can't handle this this call load. So communicate, educate, put in processes so that everybody's ready to deal with anything, any exceptions that come out, and communicate to the users if their internet experience is going to change.
Right. I mean, this is typically the process that takes the most time, believe it or not. Okay, so once you got some of the logistics out of the way, what do we do about planning? So here's where more of the technical stuff is going to come into play. So you've got to work with your departmental managers and your executives to find out what you can and cannot decrypt. Because you really don't want to decrypt everything. Not everything needs to be looked at. And so you have to figure out if there are certain things that you need to whitelist. These are your URL categories. It might be a specific server by IP address. It might be different individuals. Are all individuals blanket copied or applied to the same rule? Typically not. And so you have to start thinking about these things and identifying what needs to be decrypted, what doesn't, and if these rules and policies apply universally across your user base. It might be different for contractors, it might be different for guests coming on board. What about bring your own device? I mean, employees sometimes bring their tablets in from work. Are those subject to the same rules and policies? And if you're basically doing this in a European country where privacy laws are more strict, how are you going to do the logging? Is it legal for you to do the logging? And so those things all have to be thought through. So once you've done that, then you start concentrating on the rollout plan. And the rollout plan really is the PKI infrastructure. How do you generate that? How do you get people involved early on? How do you get early adopters to help you flush all this out so that you slowly roll it out by department and you get the things that are going to cause problems identified early so then you have greater success. Do you want to comment on some of these?
Absolutely. So again, we've already communicated and we have a plan. Make sure we do a kind of a staged approach to the rollout. SSL decryption is not the area you want to do a big bang and we decrypt everything day one. You probably want to set up a test group. And the reason for that is that test group's going to help you develop those post-cutover processes for your NOCs and your support teams to be able to deal with some of the types of issues you're going to come up with.
All right. So, plan to succeed. This is important. All of this stuff we talked about already, but with this type of particular rollout, we find that communication early on and frequent is one of the key areas of success. The worst thing that can happen is you surprise a department or a group of users with this stuff. They really, really don't like it. And Paul's already mentioned this one. If you get too aggressive in your rollout and you did not POC this properly and thoroughly with each department, because each department's going to go to different websites. My finance people are going to go to different websites than my engineers, for example. And each one of those sites and of the normal sites they go to on a day-to-day basis needs to be looked at and reviewed. So don't go crazy and roll this thing out over a long weekend because that could be the worst thing that can happen here. Okay, so let's take a look at technical strategy and planning. Well, our best practice as a security company to our customers like yourselves is your ultimate goal when you're all done with this. This project may take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to roll out, depending on how big it is and how much logistics you got to go through. Your goal is to decrypt everything by the end of the day, except the stuff you whitelisted. So depending on your vertical and your company and what it deals in, those whitelisted categories may be different, but you have to identify them. And when you do identify them, there's two really easy ways to whitelist them. The most common way is a custom URL category that you could put the domains and the URLs in. So these domains and URLs doesn't have to be the domain of the website. I mean, you can match them off the certificates, you can match them off the client side, TLS handshake, and it will work. So usually we create one category for whitelisting on a company-wide basis, and then one category for each department that you're going to roll this out into, because each department's going to have different whitelisted items. The other way to do it is with a no decrypt rule. And the no decrypt rule usually identifies something like a target application server by IP address. It could be a user, like an auditor. It could be an entire group that you don't want to decrypt for, or it could be special apps with special ports which are customized into your environment that you need to whitelist. So the other last thing that you have to consider when you're basically doing the initial planning and the rollout is how do you handle server certificates that don't comply? So how many billion sites do you think are on the internet? A couple of 100 billion maybe? A lot. Out of that couple of 100 billion sites, do you think every single server certificate that's out there is a valid, well-defined, well-created certificate? A lot of them, about 8%, according to some studies, are bad certificates. They're expired, broken chains, bad issuers, all that good stuff. So decide up front how you want to handle all of those exceptions. So when is an exception warranted? When do you need to whitelist? Well, obviously, if an application breaks when you do decryption, you definitely have to whitelist those. So it could be like a bad cert or unsupported cert or a cipher. 2 is when you have sensitive sites or sensitive material from a site that's in a general category you normally would decrypt. So you have to make an exception and a whitelist for that. When you have specific users or groups, these could be executives, they could be auditors, they could be anybody in your company, but your executives, your legal team, and you have identified that these people should not be going through decryption. We're going to whitelist those. And of course, regulatory is the other one. Different geo-regions, different rules. Talk to your legal team, really understand these before you go full bore. Here's something I want to point out. We also have something that you want to call really, really, really granular. And so in very, very high sensitive applications, you may want to give the user the option of saying yes or no to every single encrypted site they run across. So this is every time they match your decryption rule, they're going to get a little pop-up and says, hey, Phil, do you want to go to this site? If you click yes, I will decrypt it. If you click no, you can't go to that site. I'm going to block it, but you retain your privacy. So in these type of environments, I always tell my customers, this is available for you guys to use if you have to use it. But I don't advise it typically because it's pretty darn noisy. So I typically like to avoid this. Okay, how many people here, show of hands, you guys run your own PKI? Okay, that's about what, half? About third half? Okay, that's good. Now, if you run your own PKI, we have 2 bits of advice, best practices here. Now, when you generate that trust certificate and the untrust certificate, primarily the trust certificate should be a subordinate CA of your PKI. That way, when you load these certificates up onto the firewall, it's already trusted by your PKI, so you have a very, very smooth experience when you roll this out, because all of your devices, all of your browsers should already have your root CA already trusted. The other one Paul already mentioned, big best practice is if you're running 20, 30, 100 of our firewalls, and you use only one forward trust certificate generated out of your PKI, if you accidentally lose that certificate, accidentally mishandle the private key, and you got to revoke that certificate, you're going to be revoking that one certificate that applies to all firewalls, and that could get messy. So if you generate one per gateway, and you put that gateway under your root, it's going to be a lot cleaner experience if you ever need to revoke that certificate, okay? So since you...
Yeah, just a comment too, with the idea of another reason for rolling out multiple CAs to all the perimeter firewalls. Think of a global environment where you've got all these internet perimeter firewalls around the world. The reason, the argument for having a separate CA is you can identify then a user, if he has an SSL decryption issue, he's going to call the help desk and say, I can't get to a site, and you're going to say to your NOC is going to say to him, okay, well, what firewall are you going through? Well, the user doesn't know that, but a certificate error will, because you'll be able to label each certificate as coming from, UK site A issued certificate. So think about it also as a troubleshooting mechanism.
Right, good point. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so now that you've got a lot of the logistics, early thoughts on, here comes the configuration piece. Now remember, I told you, configuration, I can train you guys all within an hour in a lab how to configure this stuff. It's not rocket science. It's all the other stuff we talked about. Generally, it's the stuff that slows you down. So By now, by the time you reach this point in your rollout planning and strategy, you should have already identified this. We already talked about identifying the things that should not go under the decryption rule. These are your whitelisted items. Now, once you have that, the next step is to generate all the necessary certificates that you're going to need on all the firewalls that you want to do decryption. So make sure you have your trusted certs done, your untrusted certs done, your PKIs all set up, the private keys are all generated, and then you import them all onto the firewalls. So now the logistics for certificates are out of the way. So the next thing after that is, how do you want to handle server certificates that you see on the internet that are no good? So these are the things that have expired, they're revoked, they're using a weak certificate in the certificate chain, they're breaking the certificate chain analysis back up to the top. These are all exceptions. And so we're going to go through the profile, and you're going to see what the profile looks like in a few slides. But these are the things you need to decide up front when you're planning. Because if you check everything off to block, it's going to get very noisy. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Once you have these profiles done, you're almost home free. The last step is now to create the individual decryption rules, and then you start rolling it out. So fairly simple in terms of steps. So let's take a look at what I got up here as what we deem a best practice decryption rule. It looks fairly straightforward, looks like a security rule. Now, our best advice to our customers is when you identify the things that should not go under decryption, these are the exceptions in the whitelist, you're going to want the most specific stuff at the top. So in my example up here, I put basically destination IP addresses that I don't want decrypted up top. Then my second rule is users and groups that should never be decrypted. I put those there. The third rule is basically any specific URL that I don't want decrypted. And then it gets more wider now. I'm casting a wider net at the next policy. These are the general categories that my executives, HR, and legal tells me I shouldn't be looking at. So these might be financial, they might be healthcare, things like that. And then the last rule, I'm going to try, remember, your objective at the end of all of this rollout is to decrypt everything else. Because remember, 1/3 to 40% of all malware comes across this stuff. So if you miss a couple of categories or you get too graceful with categories, you run the risk of getting something. So Paul, what do you think about this rule set? Is there something that you got to think about when you're doing app ID and all that other stuff?
Yeah, so what I want to interject here is we got to understand that an app ID-based policy can actually break decryption. So that's why, from a best practice perspective, Pro Services says you migrate your firewall from a port-based to port-based, and then the first thing we always recommend you doing is converting that policy to app-based policy. And the reason for that, if you follow along here, the way we say do a staged, controlled rollout is when you start to roll out this decryption policy, you're not going to roll out to the whole community. You're going to take a test bed, and you're going to roll it out. What you might find is some of your app ID rules are breaking decryption, okay? So it's better to do that at this stage than basically enable decryption with a port-based rule, because that's always going to work, right? And then you're going to migrate your policy from port-based to app-based, then you're going to break decryption, then your NOC's going to get mad, then everybody's going to get in trouble again.
Right. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so let's take a look at what one of these rules look like. Okay, you guys are all fire administrators, you're our customers, you understand basically the first 3 tabs. Those should not be foreign at all. General, source, dest applies the exact same way. Now, underneath this category, you know, the URL category, this is where you basically say, okay, it's the SSL protocol I'm after, and these are the categories I either want to inspect or I don't want to inspect. So you list the categories here. The next action tab, or really the next tab over for options, you see that there's a set of radio buttons for there for either the positive action, which is to decrypt, or the negative action, not to decrypt. This is where you get to decide if it's a whitelisted or a blacklisted rule. The next one that you apply is basically the type, and because we're doing forward inspection out to the internet, this is where I basically say this is for forward proxy decryption versus inbound decryption versus decryption port mirror and so forth. And then there's that decryption profile next. The decryption profile is the profile on how we want to handle certificate exceptions, when things don't go just the right way that I want them to. So here's what a profile looks like, and this is what I meant by really deciding what you want to do with those certificates and protocols that you guys see from the internet. And so my best practice to a bunch of our customers is don't let the weak stuff through. And the reason I typically don't let the weak stuff through is because we're enterprises. We're not home users. We have computer usage policies that our employees sign and agree to when they come to work for us, that they will only use the equipment and the bandwidth and the infrastructure to conduct business. And then of course, everybody goes do some private stuff within reason. They've all signed that. So here, I start removing the stuff that the bad guys typically use, and they could be weak ciphers, they could be all that other stuff, that generally an enterprise class solution or website or service will not use. So let's just remove that off the table, and we'll deal with the exceptions later. The other thing to do is you see all those block check marks? That's when Paul and I were basically talking, if you get too aggressive here, you're going to see more people calling your knock, because you're going to run into certificates. And remember, about 8% of all certificates on the public internet are malformed, they're expired, they're bad, they're going to cause a problem. So if you get too aggressive with the blocking here, you're going to see a lot of those messages come up. And so generally, I would check the first two, like block expired stuff, making sure that my protocols are good, I'm only honoring strong protocols and stuff like that, and then I'm going to start my POC with every single department. And I'm going to see what my POC users do and where they go and how they trigger this stuff. And it's a learning process for me, and then at that time, I'm going to fine-tune, fine-tune, fine-tune until the early adopters in every single department that I chose, there's nothing lighting up the alerts anymore. That's when I'll start rolling it out to that general population in that group. So always use your exercise your rights to block, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, just one other thing too. With regards to this, like Phil said, this can be very disruptive, but it's still a best practice to block, expired certificates and untrusted issuers. I mean, today, I know for a fact that probably almost 100% of you today, you're browsing the internet, you get an invalid certificate, the first thing you do is bypass that certificate and go right to the site. Yeah. If you turn this on, that user experience changes, and if that user experience changes, there's going to be, once again, the knock's going to be inundated. So again, it's about communication. If the knock knows this situation, and you've communicated that from now on, we're not letting people go to sites that have expired certificates or invalid issuers. You communicate that to the community. You make sure the knock's ready to respond to calls they get. It makes things a lot smoother.
Well said. I don't like it when my knock gets busy. All right. So let's take a look at these. Even when you decide to do a no decrypt, even when you decide to whitelist that site or that category, should you be allowing an expired certificate to go through? You shouldn't. So make sure, even for the whitelisted stuff and the no decrypt rules, you make sure you're enforcing good certificates. We always do a certificate check regardless if you tell us to whitelist it or not, okay? So a revoked certificate is different than an expired certificate. So for example, didn't Google have an incident about a year and a half ago? One of their root certificates got compromised and they had to revoke the whole thing. And so it's a horrible process when you have to revoke something. And so if you're not checking for revoked certificates, you'll never know that the issuer had a problem and they had to take that certificate back. So generally when they have to take back a certificate, generally they leaked it out accidentally, they lost the private key and things like that. And those are the certificates you don't want going through the firewall because a bad guy might now have them. Okay, now Wildfire. This is important. How many people here are using the free version or the paid version of Wildfire? All right, about half. Here's the reason why this is a best practice. In 2016, the Wildfire technology that we use caught a lot of zero-day threats, malware, fast morphing, changing threats, way before your desktop AV ever caught it. And I went and talked to the PLM before this session, and I said, on general, how fast is Wildfire in detecting that type of malware activity before Trend Micro, Symantec, McAfee, the big three, gets a signature in its database that can catch the same thing? And he told me it varies widely. And it varies widely because sometimes on a good month, they're good. On a bad month, they're really bad. And so he told me in the last 2016 metrics, 40 to 70% of all things caught by Wildfire is not in the top 3's database. And this is why you want to be using at least the free version of Wildfire. So Wildfire is a cloud-based service. And because of privacy and all the geo regions that I've talked about, we don't enable sending up decrypted files to the Wildfire cloud automatically, because we could be violating all of your privacy laws and things like that. So however you turn this on, it's done by that little checkbox, allow forwarding of decrypted content, and it's turned on in 2 different ways. Whether you're a single vSys or you're multi-vSys, that's a single vSys, that's the multi-vSys. Pretty simple to do, but you have to remember to turn it on because we can't do it for you because it might violate privacy laws. Okay, this guy. Now that you got everything set, you're ready to roll out, you thought of everything, you've done your POC, you're now gonna roll out. You don't want to encounter this guy, right? So what could possibly go wrong when I start mass producing the rollout? So the first thing that can go wrong is things that technically break decryption. This is by far the most common. So things that can technically break decryption are unsupported ciphers, incomplete chains. When someone's doing mutual auth, that means the client has their certificate and the server's got to authenticate the client at the same time the client authenticates the server. That breaks decryption because no security vendor in the world is going to have the scale to put the entire internet population's private certificates into their firewall to decrypt. Any application with a hard-coded certificate is going to break. These are generally custom apps, mobile apps, where the server certificate is completely embedded inside the client, and it does not allow any other impersonation certificates, therefore it breaks. Okay, so what do we do about it? A lot of people go, holy crap, this could really ring my IT help desk off the hook. And I switch it around. Now, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of information. Paul and I were big IT guys before we came into the product side. And so we ran Fortune 100, 1,000 type of companies. We're standing on stage, but we sat in your exact positions when we ran all these things. I take a look at this as an opportunity for my security team, my IT team, to review the thing that broke, to make sure that whatever broke is a business-related application. This is my chance to go, you're trying to go to a football site or a gaming site or something that's non-business, and I'm going to take this opportunity to bring back the computer usage policy and says, we're not allowing you to go. So after you manually review it, there's 2 actions. You can either permit it if it's a business app, and we already talked about how to do that, or you could deny it with a security policy and things and a URL filtering app. So this is really your chance to get an eyeball on it, really review it to see if it's justified or not. So we talked about certificates a lot, and this is the second most popular reason that could cause a problem. This is when my forward trust certificate is either not installed properly on my firewall, or it's not propagated out to my end devices and browsers. And so you have 3 options to getting the certificate and the private key onto the firewall. This is the first one. The first one is just going into the firewall, into the certificate management area and says, hey, go to this PKI and generate a CSR, and if the PKI and us talk properly, it's going to generate the entire package, the private key, and it's going to give it back to the firewall and you're good to go. The second way is if you decide to go and buy one of those certificates because you didn't run your own PKI, or you have another group running the PKI, they generated you the certificate payload package, and they gave it to you on a thumb drive. That's the other way. So now you got to manually load it, and when you manually load it, remember you got to load the private key because we're the guys in the middle that has to decrypt. The last one is that we typically don't recommend this except for a POC, a POC. And this is when you're playing with the technology, you can easily play with it and not mess around by bugging the PKI guy and giving you a cert as you just experiment with it, but it doesn't scale. And so our best practice is option 1 because it's the easiest to get everything onto the firewall in one shot. Third reason is very closely related to the previous one. After the certificate is generated, you basically did not include this on the device's trusted CA list. If that trust certificate is not there, guess what happens? the browser throws up that big warning, you shouldn't go here, right? So this is the big one. Now, for those that are using Palo Alto Networks Global Protect portal, just remember that we also have a way here to easily distribute certificates amongst all of our GP clients as well. So this is just mechanisms for you to automate if you need to automate. Okay, the fourth one, people hate it when something that they're used to getting breaks. If I'm used to going to a site to do business and all of a sudden on Monday morning I came in after you rolled this out and it broke, I'm going to kind of freak out if you didn't give me a reason why it broke. And so underneath our response pages is a certificate, what we call a certificate comfort page. I highly recommend that you turn that on so that at least they see something when a certificate error causes a breakage. And now when they call IT, they're not just saying, hey, something broke, but they can actually read what's on the screen and you can actually see why it broke. So I'm going to talk about two different things here. Exclude caches. Now, remember one of the main reasons why certificates or decryption breaks is technical reasons. Now, the firewall will always know when it technically breaks because either it's a PIN certificate, untrusted cipher, mutual authentication. Those are all technical reasons for breaking. And so we have a CLI command, as you can see up there. And on every firewall that you do decryption, you can run the CLI command, and you can see what sites we discovered locally on that firewall that broke. The other way to do it is with 8.0. How many people are playing around with 8.0 right now? Cool. All right. 8.0 actually automated this. This list actually comes across as part of your content update. So every night, every couple of days, we update this list and we feed it out to the firewalls automatically. And these are the sites, it's a little bit hard to see, but you see the description, the third row over? We actually give you the technical reason why it broke. It could be a PIN certificate, could be a mutual authentication and things like that. And you see that, the checkbox in the far right-hand column? We automatically enable that. And when you enable that, we whitelist that site. We don't bother decrypting it because we know it's going to break. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to simply allow every user to go there. Remember, it still counterbalances with the URL filtering and security policies as well. Okay. All right, so best practice here, when we rolled this out, a lot of our beta users started putting sites that their users should be whitelisted into this list. It's not the same thing. This is a list for sites that technically break decryption. And these are the only things that should go in here. You should use custom URL categories to whitelist all the other stuff. So keep them separate. All right. Now, what happens when things break and you need to start doing forensics and investigation? Remember that traffic logs are still your best friend. And in the end reasons with decryption, we give you three high probability or the most popular reasons why that decryption broke, and those are the three that's up there. So cert validation, unsupported ciphers, and things like that we list out. Okay, this slide. What happens when you pull Paul's Big Bang and you basically turn this thing on all over July 4th long weekend and 20,000 employees came back to work the next day and there was 500 broken sites? Help desk rings off the hook, VPs get involved, you got to roll things back. Well, if you pull the trigger too fast and you develop 50, 60, 100 rules for decryption, you're not going to have enough time to go there and uncheck every one and do a commit. We have two CLI commands that let you pull back decryption device-wide in a box very, very quickly. Those are up there. Disable decryption. Boom, it's done. No commit. And then when you're ready to turn it back on, you can turn it back on. Boom, no commit. You're back on. Simple, easy peasy. You guys are all experts now? All right. Now, this is another question I get asked a lot. How does decryption affect my performance? And yes, it does affect performance. There's no easy rule. There's no magic formula because it depends on three things. The three things it depends on is one, how much stuff are you decrypting? Are you decrypting everything? Do you have broad categories that you whitelisted? And so forth, right? The second thing is, well, what's out in the public internet? There's a couple 100 billion sites out there. If they're using a strong cipher like perfect forward secrecy, which you need to regen another key every single session, And regenerating keys are the most CPU-intensive process of the TLS handshake. You're going to suck a lot of CPU, right? So it really depends on that mixture of RSA versus PFS and how strong the key exchange is and how strong the cipher suite is. Elliptic curve is generally more stronger than non-elliptic curve, and it's going to take more CPU cycles to do it. The platform is going to make a world of difference. If you're running a 3020 and some other guy's running a 5260, they're going to blow the doors off of 3020. It's just that the newer generation platforms have a lot more cores, a lot more power, and new Cavium decryption chips in them. So they're way, way, way faster. Just to give you an idea, I've got a couple minutes here. We just finished a test on a 5260 running a 2K key, AES 256, running an average transaction size of about 256K, which is about the internet average right now. And we're getting somewhere around 11 gigs of throughput through that box. Now, when you turn on PFS, of course, PFS is very, very tough key negotiation, high CPU. It's going to drop those numbers approximately by 50%. Now, the good news is coming out, you're all under visual NDA now. Basically, in the next release, we are doing some tuning in that area and performance. PFS performance, if we do our jobs right, in 8.1, it will be almost equal to RSA performance. Don't quote me on time. The answer was time frame. Now, these are one of these song and dances I got to give up here, right? No, but time frame, let's just say hopefully end of year, okay? Don't quote me on that. So basically, the good news is if you're thinking about decryption, you're going to be rolling it out. Performance is going to be something we're going to address significantly with PFS in the next release. So feel comfortable, start planning, start that thought process right now. So I have a couple of minutes here to take some questions, but I wanted to make sure you guys got as much information as possible. I want you to take away the comfort feeling when you leave here, that this stuff isn't voodoo, it isn't really, really hard to do. Yes, it's a lot of POCing. Yes, it's different between every single department, but having this information in steps is important. Paul from Pro Services has done a lot of these. If you guys need Pro Services, we're here to help, so just remember you don't have to do it alone. And the two guys up front here are part of my team from headquarters, Vinod and Dwanit, stand up, say hi. They're here in the exhibit halls. We're going to be hanging out at the expert labs. Any questions whatsoever, come down and see us down there. So questions so far, we've got some microphones going around. Okay, one right here. Okay, one over there is the second one. All right, go ahead, the person with the mic.
Yeah, great presentation. You mentioned some of the newer platforms have Cambion chips. Which ones are the ones with Cambion chips? First part. Second one is, how do you feel about decryption and whether or not it's supported on the virtual platforms?
So basically the Cavium chips, now remember, all of our hardware-based platforms from basically, 500 and up, all have Cavium chips. Now, of course, the 5200 series, the 800 series that we just announced with 8.0 are going to have the latest ones, right? And so the 5200 series has the more powerful Nitrox chipsets in them and things like that. And so that's why the capacity is a lot higher. Plus, we have a lot more cores in the 5200 series, and they're running at a much higher clock frequency as well. Now, on virtual platforms, basically we will use, of course, the general purpose CPUs for those. And so the 500 VM series, 700 VM series can address a lot more CPU and power. And it also depends on the platform CPU, gigahertz rating that you're running on. So the faster, the more powerful the Xeon processor, the more throughput you're going to get through in terms of decryption.
So I've actually deployed SSL decryption before, and the biggest thing we ran into was Citrix apps, WebEx, all that type of stuff. When it comes to auto bypassing stuff, does it recognize those sessions being built, or do we need to build out exceptions for all of that?
I typically like to understand what I'm whitelisting. I don't like to auto whitelist. I mean, as a security person myself, if I auto whitelist, I don't know what's going on. And so my team usually wants to know what's going on. So my best practice to you is know what you're whitelisting, fully understand it. Auto whitelisting sometimes can be risky. Yeah, the question was, can it auto could it auto-detect that it's a Citrix app ID and can auto-whitelist it? I don't believe we can do that. I believe it's manual today.
Is there a reason why you didn't mention EDLs as a mechanism to create exceptions?
Yes, actually EDL is another way that you could do it.
I think it's brilliant. That's a good
whitelist.
fit for purpose, I think.
Yes, you can.
And may I ask another question? When you do CRL checks, does firewall cache the CRLs?
Correct. Whenever we do any type of revocation checking, we do cache that. And so you're not making a call all the time. And so we do a lot of caching with revocation checking as well as other thing checking in it. So you're not hitting it every single time. All right, we just ran out of time, but I'll take one more and then we can meet everybody outside.
Unless this is important.
Okay.
You mentioned decryption mirror ports. Are you able to decrypt the traffic and send it off the box to a WAF or something like that and then send it back?
Now, decryption mirror port is generally one way. And so you decrypt once, clear text goes out to some third-party device and it never comes back to the firewall. All right. Am I out of time, timekeepers? All right, we're out of time. Now remember, 2 guys here, Paul and I be outside if you guys want to talk to us, or we'll be down at exhibit hall. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of this. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable rolling this out. All right.